This episode of the Demonic Compendium contains spoilers for the following games. Viewer discretion is advised. Also, before we get started, I do have to give extra special thanks to Atlas West for providing me with an advance copy of Shin Megami Tensei V so I could make this video the best I possibly could. I do have some SMT5 footage in this episode, but I promise this is a spoiler-free affair. Thank you. Welcome to a thunderous new episode of the Demonic Compendium, the show where I discuss the mythology, design, and game history of your favorite Megami Tensei demons. All funny intros aside, Shin Megami Tensei V is out today. It's the one we've been waiting for, and it's finally here, and I couldn't be more excited. I've known for years who I had to talk about today, so put on your awesome helmet and prepare to get hammered, because today, we're talking about Thor. Where does one even begin talking about Thor? He's one of the most well-known and iconic figures in all of mythology. I think they even made a comic book about him. Well, let's get the obvious stuff out of the way first, shall we? Thor is the Norse god of thunder and son of Odin, the Allfather, who is essentially the ruler of the deities of Asgard. He's perhaps best known as the wielder of Mjolnir, a mythical hammer that was forged by dwarves, and really is just as famous as its master. Mjolnir returns to Thor when it is thrown and can be used to create powerful lightning storms. Now, typically, when I cover a figure on this show, there's usually like one main story I can tell. But Thor's exploits are so vast that if I tried to cover even a couple of them, we'd be here all day. And trust me, this video is going to be long enough when I get to the game history section. So I'd like to just share one of my favorite stories of this red-headed, beer-bellied warrior god we all know and love. Once upon a time, Thor's hammer was stolen by the Jotun, or Frost Giants, and one of the giant leaders, Thrym, basically said he would not return the hammer until Freya, the Norse goddess of love and fertility, agreed to be his bride. After a brief meeting regarding what to do, Heimdall proposed that Thor disguise himself as Freya to try and trick the giants. Oh yeah, and for good measure, Loki would tag along to make sure everything went swimmingly. What could possibly go wrong? Well, somehow this basically works until Thor nearly blows his own cover at the celebratory engagement dinner by eating, 8 salmon, an entire ox, 3 barrels of mead, and the entire wedding cake. This causes Thrym to be a tad bit suspicious, but thankfully, Loki manages to come up with a proper excuse regarding how nervous Freya has been about the wedding, so she hasn't eaten in like a week. At the wedding, Mjolnir is presented to Freya as a gift, whereupon Thor unveils himself, quite literally, and proceeds to use his reacquired hammer to kill Thrym and basically everyone at the wedding. The end. During the end times, Ragnarok, Thor is destined to perish after being bitten by a colossal serpent by the name of Jormungandr. While Thor also kills the serpent, the venom from that bite leads to his own downfall. There are a great deal of amazing stories involving the God of Thunder, and feel free to share what your absolute favorite is down in the comments below, but I think we should all probably move on. Thor's Compendium entry from Shin Megami Tensei V, God, it feels good to say that, refers to him as the Norse god of thunder and fertility whose strength is incomparable. He is a heroic and honest god worshipped mainly by farmers and is primarily known for defeating the giants. He wields Mjolnir, a hammer that returns to its owner after being thrown. He and the world serpent Jormungandr are fated to kill each other at Ragnarok. One slightly funny note is a lot of Thor's Compendium entries specifically mention his belt Meggingjard, which supposedly doubles his physical strength, and yet, the Thor many of us are most familiar with doesn't wear a belt. Design-wise, Thor has had a handful of different depictions throughout the franchise. In his earliest SMT designs, he was depicted as a black-haired warrior wearing mostly gold armor, wielding a silver hammer and sporting a white cape. It's really fascinating to see how Kaneko would keep so many features of this original version in a later design. Then there's also his Devil Summoner design, which makes him look more like a barbarian. Conan the Barbarian, that is, as Arnold Schwarzenegger's depiction of this Robert E. Howard character was definitely an inspiration here. possibly along with Boris Vallejo versions of the character, and possibly even a little of Marvel's Thor from 1988's The Incredible Hulk Returns, where the Asgardian was played by Eric Kramer. This particular design has mainly been seen by Western audiences in the Devil Survivor and SMT4 titles, but it first appeared in 3D in the mobile title D2, appearing as a Thor from another dimension. A Soul Hackers variant of this design also exists where Thor is blue, possibly in reference to the frost giants he's so famous for fighting. But the most iconic Thor is his newest design, which debuted in Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne. Like I mentioned before, Kaneko kept a lot of traits from that first design. The white cape, the gold armor, the long black hair, and the horned helm, and of course that signature hammer. What's interesting is despite being a Norse figure, Kaneko has said a big inspiration for this version of Thor was Mexican luchadores. On one hand, it's not the most mythologically accurate depiction of Thor. I honestly think if you took away the hammer, most people wouldn't even guess that this is Thor. But on the other hand, he looks awesome, and it's such an iconic design. Thor even has a Demi-Kids design where, I'm sorry, he just looks kinda goofy to me. It's that great big smile that breaks me. As far as game history goes, whew boy, there's a lot here, and I'm probably still going to miss some stuff, like I always do with these great big videos, but I'm sure as shoot gonna try and cover the biggest and most interesting things that I can. And let's go right ahead and start with the Shin Megami Tensei series. Thor plays a pretty big part in several SMT games, starting with the very first Shin Megami Tensei. Early in the hero's journey, he'll encounter a foreign ambassador by the name of Thorman, who later reveals himself to be Thor. He acts as part of the lawful side of things, and after his boss fight, he's such a sore loser that he nukes all of Japan, essentially causing the very first apocalypse in a series that's become pretty well known for them. Later in Shin Megami Tensei 2, Thorman is specifically referred to as the one that caused the cataclysm the game primarily centers around. Thorman is also mentioned by name in the original Devil Summoner, where he apparently died of a heart attack just 1 year away from the funny number. Thor's largest role in the series is undoubtedly in Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne, where he appears as one of the highest ranking members of the Mantra. He's first encountered in Ikebukuro assaulting and imprisoning Izamu before the Demi-Fiend fights him during his own trial. After the death of Goz to No, Thor goes on a journey of self-reflection, which basically means he shows up once more at nearly the very end of the game, and is fought one more time, but beating him here unlocks him for fusion. Thor also has a special conversation with Loki, and what's most interesting is their talk is in reference to the mythological story of when Loki chopped off Thor's wife's hair. Thor is understandably furious with Loki about what was done to his wife, Sif, but what I find most interesting is that Sif has never actually appeared in Megami Tensei as a demon, so they're basically discussing a figure with virtually no franchise presence. Thor does have a small part in Shin Megami Tensei IV's challenge quest, Save the Old Man, where he has a bit of interaction with Odin, though oddly enough, doesn't do much in Apocalypse, where Odin has a much larger role. And that brings us to Shin Megami Tensei V. Remember that very first teaser nearly 5 years ago? That very first announcement for what would eventually become Shin Megami Tensei V? Thor was the very first demon we saw in that teaser, and I couldn't think of any other demon more worthy to discuss today, given that fantastic moment, and of course his roles in other SMT games. Here's kind of the funny thing, Thor really doesn't have much to do in Shin Megami Tensei V, at least not that I found in my first playthrough. You do need him as an ingredient to fuse Odin, but that's really about it. It's possible he has a unique conversation with someone like he did in Nocturne, but if he does, I couldn't find it. Thor even pops up in Shin Megami Tensei Liberation D2. Like I mentioned before, his old design got a 3D model as a dimensional summon, and generally when this happens, the game provides a cutscene where the new and old versions of a demon interact with one another. Sadly, since the Thors shared this scene with Surt, they really didn't get a lot of one-on-one time. Thor even manages to have some presence in Tokyo Mirage Session Sharp FE. Itsuki's strongest weapon, the True Falchion, grants him the Thoron spell, which is arguably more of a Fire Emblem thing, but it's still a direct reference to Thor in a Megaten game. Kyria also has Mjolnir as one of her weapons, but sticking true to her character, it's Mjolnir if it were a mic stand that's also a magic staff. And while I'm on the subject of Tokyo Mirage Sessions, I guess since those characters are in Fire Emblem Heroes, I should also take a moment to mention Thor in that game, who looks a bit different than most of us would expect, and actually has a pretty big role as an antagonist in various events and challenges in the title. So, here I go, mentioning Thor in Fire Emblem Heroes, because of her connection in the loosest possible sense to Tokyo Mirage Sessions. Moving on. Oh wait, technically the Fire Emblem Heroes Thor was in an event in Dragalia Lost, which also has a character named Galathor, and that game also had Persona 5 characters in it at some point. I don't know if any of this counts, but I still wanted to mention it. Okay, now we're moving on. In Devil Summoner Raido Kuzunoha vs. the Soulless Army, Thor appears as the highest level demon of the Volt Order. And while this isn't the case in the sequel, Devil Summoner 2, Raido Kuzunoha vs. King Abaddon, he does have a unique conversation, this time with the wolf Fenrir, who chastises and criticizes Thor and those he follows. Thor is also one of the demon companions of Garen Kuzunoha when he and Raido face off towards the end of the game in a gentleman's duel. Thor has had several roles in the Persona series. He first appeared in Persona 1, and in Revelations Persona he was known as, well, Thor. I guess they felt like Thor was well known enough that he didn't need some Americanized name. But if anything, I take that as a testament to how big of a deal Thor truly is. He's also had a few things worth mentioning in Persona 3. For starters, Thor is the ultimate persona of the Chariot Arcana, and is unlocked for fusion after completing Kazushi Miyamoto's Social Link. Or Ryo Iwasaki's if you're playing Codenaze route in Persona 3 Portable. Upon fusing Thor and leveling him up, players can get the Lightning Gloves item, which nullifies electric attacks, and if he's fused into a weapon at the antique store in the mall, Makoto can actually get Mjolnir. Something I genuinely love about this item is the weapon model for it is very clearly based on the actual hammer that Thor holds in the franchise. Like, it's basically the same hammer. I really like that. Not like in, say, Persona 5, where sending Thor to the electric chair gets Mjolnir for Ryuji, but for some reason in this game it's more of a mace. Sorry to jump ahead, back to Persona 3. What's also cool is instead of strike damage, like most hammer weapons, Mjolnir naturally deals strength-based electrical damage. For better or worse. Thor is one half needed for the fusion spell, Thunder Call, which is an incredibly powerful electric attack that he performs with Take Mikazuchi. No, not that one. And like most other fusion spells, Elizabeth has a request for players to perform this spell, saying it will require Take Mikazuchi and another God of Thunder. And on the subject of Elizabeth, Thor is her persona of choice when performing Zeo spells during the boss battle against her as the ultimate opponent. While not having as much of a role as he did in Persona 3, one noteworthy aspect of Thor in Persona 4 is that this time he gets the unique spell Thunder Rain, the most powerful electric spell in the game. Thor has also had quite a few roles in Persona 5. I already mentioned him being used to create a unique weapon for Ryuji, Mjolnir, but he also has a small role in Sai-Nijima's palace under the name Thunder Emperor, and appears as the final boss Joker must face in a series of 3 battles, which I'm assuming may have been a direct callback to his role in Nocturne. In Persona 5 Royal, Thor is once again used by a member of the Velvet Room, as he's one of the personas used by Lavenza during the final stage of her boss fight. Thor makes his return to being the ultimate persona of the Chariot Arcana in Persona 5 Strikers, and completing the request Painful Past Plus, Akira Konoe, will reward players with Ryuji's best weapon, Mjolnir S, which, again, is less of a hammer and more of a mace. Why did they make it a mace? Thor is one of the most well-known and iconic figures throughout every realm of mythology, and it's no surprise that from Ambassador Thorman to defending Shadowsize Casino, that he's left an incredibly powerful and noteworthy impression on the franchise as a whole. And so there you have it, Thor, the salmon-swallowing, storm-slinging son of supremacy and sentimental spouse of Sif. Did I leave out something you thought was important? Was I just plain wrong about something? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to let me know who you'd like to see me talk about in future episodes. That's going to do it for this episode of the Demonic Compendium, and I will see you next time. But be careful while you rest that a demon doesn't take over your body.